Morning, May.
Morning.
So we'll give it just a couple of minutes, May. The presentation actually takes about 40 minutes, so I don't want to delay too long, but we'll maybe give it a minute or two to see if anyone else joins us.
Very good. You're doing this again tonight, right?
Yep, at 6 o'clock.
Let's see, when is our community engagement meeting? Maybe if no one else comes in, maybe I can join the evening meeting and you guys can do something else for the next hour.
So it looks like we have Billy too.
Okay.
I asked Deb if she wanted to do community engagement this Thursday, and she said no, she wanted more time to work on things. So it sounds like we're going to meet next Thursday. And while I've got you, I did send an email asking if you were okay if we moved the full committee meeting to the 30th of March, giving everyone an additional week to work on their goals and objectives.
The reason I haven't responded to that is I know that Deb is going to be going out of town in about 10 days. So I wanted to check with her and see where she stood on that. That's why I haven't responded.
Got it. Sure, just let me know.
Okay.
Well, since we have you and Billy, and again, I don't want to, our presentation, like I said, takes about 40 minutes. I'm just going to get started. So good morning and thanks for joining us. What we're doing today is a presentation on the 2018 International Code Adoption Recommendations for Netherlands. Today you have with us the full administrative committee, which consists of myself, Karen Garrity, Cynthia Bakke, who unfortunately is showing up as my name twice, but she is on here, Chris Pelletier, and Rick Hendrickson, who will be joining us momentarily. What we're going to do is provide an overview of the recommended changes for the 2018 building code, and then ask for any feedback that you have. In an effort just to get through this, we do ask that you wait until the end with your questions. I'll jump right in. So there's a total of 15 books that we're looking at adopting, either through full adoption or partial adoption. And in this PowerPoint, we highlight some of the changes that occur with the updates to 2018. We are, as a town, currently adhering to 2012 code. So the first thing is that there's a new book that's been added. Before, pools and spas were incorporated into other books. However, this year they are broken into their own book, and we are recommending adopting that in its entirety. The other change is in regards to wind speed. So wind speed was previously calculated by second gust. And so in Netherlands, where we're climate zone 7, the wind speed was 3-second gusts. The speed has now been changed to an ultimate wind speed. So Netherlands was 130 miles per hour. It's now, based on this 100-year occurrence, is showing as 144 miles per hour. This next slide shows the 700-year occurrence, which puts the wind speed at 168 miles per hour for our climate zone. And then this next slide shows Boulder County. They did their own assessment and determined that Netherlands was actually 175 miles per hour. Safe Built, who is our building code official, they're recommending that we focus on 144 miles per hour wind speed. Because first, that's only a slight increase from the 130, which is where we are now. And it's also not going to add a significant cost with that slight change, where say if we use the 175 miles per hour, it would be more challenging for contractors to secure building materials to withstand that wind. There's also been an increase to stud height. And for that, previously you couldn't exceed 10 feet. And now there has been an increase to allow people to build more of those high ceilings that they weren't able to do so before. I think one of the great things about the International Residential Code is they really made it with the homeowner in mind. So there's also tables throughout the code that are a lot easier for people to read, making it very much more user-friendly. In Netherlands, I think we know that a lot of people prefer to build log homes. The new code does allow log buildings to meet the requirements for the thermal envelope, which ultimately just makes the home more energy efficient. Within the 2018 building code, there are a series of appendices. Each one has to be incorporated on their own. When you adopt the entire building code, say you adopted the full 2018 residential code, it doesn't automatically mean that all the appendices are adopted. So they do need to be added in individually. And currently our administrative team is in the process of reviewing all appendices to determine which ones we're interested in adopting. What is on this slide, though, are the appendices that SafeBuilt is recommending we consider, and I've included a link to where you can access those. I will go ahead and send a copy of this to May and Billy to you afterwards so that you can access all the links that are included in the document. There actually has not been a change, but we wanted to add this anyways, to one-story detached accessory structures. Currently, there is no permit needed for structures under 200 square feet, and that does stay the same. It's helpful in regards to consistency between code years when you do have things like that stay consistent. Another change is in regards to relocating structures. Currently, the town code excludes relocating structures that are less than 120 square feet. And SafeBuilt is recommending we change that to 200 square feet in order to match the International Building Code and the International Residential Code. You have the wall and ceiling about insulation, and really there's no change aside from the above grade wall. So in this chart, you'll see in that first column, there's a change in insulation. That first number is the interior thermal envelope, and the +5 accounts for the shear wall. R20 is common for 2x6 walls for the insulation, but R13 accommodates 2x4 walls, which is why you see that second set of numbers, the 13 + 10 listed. And the next two slides, I'll just briefly show examples of what the insulation would look like based on the standard. So here you see by the measurements what the insulation would look like ranging from the R15 to the R49. And so we're looking at the kind of R13 through R20. So in these first two categories. And this next slide shows the continuous versus cavity insulation and the difference in between the two. From another efficiency standpoint, we are looking at the U factor. So you do see there's no change for skylights, but there's a decrease in the U factor for windows. The lower the number, the more energy efficient the window is. So under the 2018 code, we're looking at a 0.30 U factor. Most windows, though, they'll have a sticker. Most windows are typically 0.27, which is below the threshold of what the 2018 code requires. But this is just an example of where you would look on a new window for what that U factor is. There's also a focus on PV systems, and they have their own chapter in the International Residential Code. And that's important because in Netherlands, we've seen a lot more installations of these systems. So the great thing is SafeBuilt electrical inspectors are familiar and knowledgeable about PV systems and can help our community as we continue to see more and more of these PV systems installed. There's been a lot of questions about energy savings or costs with the 2018 code. So there actually really isn't much of an increase in terms of costs from 2012 to 2018. However, we did identify that Boulder County has stricter energy conservation codes. So Garrett McDaniel, who's the sustainability coordinator who's on this call, he has been doing a comparison between their codes and the 2018 International Energy Conservation Codes to really assess maybe what guidelines Netherlands should consider if we're looking to make our homes more energy efficient as we see kind of new builds and significant remodels. Chris, yesterday I covered this slide, but would you like to do a quick update on the C&D program? Otherwise, I will.
Yeah, sure. So this program was started in 2017, and we capture, we intercept permits at the application stage to encourage people to recycle C&D stuff, which stands for construction and demolition debris. Charge a fee of 25 cents per square foot. It's not a program that's very active. We'd like to get more participation in the project and encouragement of people to recycle their construction debris. And the funds that it generates go back to other conservation measures for the town and zero waste activities. So in a nutshell, that's what the program is, and that's it.
Thanks, Chris. So our goal is to really revitalize this program as a part of the 2018 Building Code updates. So more information to come, but we just wanted to include this slide just to remind everyone that the C&D program is still in process and in play, but we're going to give it kind of a facelift and a revitalization. So I'll now turn it over to Rick Hendrickson, Fire Marshal, to go over 2018 Fire Code. Rick, you're muted if you're there.
Hey, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. A couple things here on the fire code we want to talk about. First thing is the actual fire code. 99% of it only applies to commercial buildings. So if you've got single family residence, two family, it doesn't apply to any of that, or very, very little. Talk about some of where it does. Very few of the changes in the 18 code affect anything in Netherlands. Again, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And because of that, there's very little cost with the fire code specifically. We'll talk about some other things that do have some more cost in a minute. So a couple of new things here. Chapter 3 in the fire code, they added food trucks and gave us information on that, on how to inspect those, make sure they're safe. We're certainly seeing a lot more of those in town. And we're also looking at kind of a front range wide permitting program for that, so that if you have a food truck that's licensed, say in Boulder, that would apply up here as well, at least from, or not licensed, but at least inspected from the fire code standpoint. Second thing in chapter 9, they've added the allowance for water mist fire suppression systems, which are a new technology, at least in this country. They use a lot less water, a little bit higher pressure. They're a fairly expensive system for a new build, but for a retrofit, it may be a good affordable option. Chapter 11, this is one thing that will have a little cost to it, does add a requirement for CO detection in daycares and schools. We do have a couple of daycares. I suspect they already have CO detectors in there, but this would require that addition. There's no requirement to have a full built-in fire and CO detection alarm system. So if they don't already have that, they don't need to add that. Just add the, the plug-in type CO detectors. Chapter 12 is a new chapter, and I really like this because they combined all of the energy systems, and that's everything from photovoltaics to batteries into one chapter. So we can find everything there rather than bouncing back and forth between different chapters of the code. Chapter 39 is also a new chapter where they put processing and extraction facilities. This is typically in the marijuana industry. Currently, we don't have anybody in town that has a extraction facility that's using volatile liquids, although we could, and this will allow it to all be in one spot in the code. It makes it much easier for us to look through, give guidance to an owner, and also enforce. So, all right, next slide. So the three things we're looking at changing are an amendment to the code, and not just the fire code. First is residential fire suppression systems, and that's home fire sprinklers. Currently, that exists in the code. In the 2012 code, the town amended that out, so it wasn't a requirement. These are primarily life safety systems, but usually put the fire out, as we saw on Alpine Drive this last summer. Put the fire out, prevented more injury, was very successful use of the system. Exterior fire resistance and required defensible space. This is something that is, fire resistance is already required in town if your home falls within 5 feet of a property line, but it decreases in requirements as you get further from the property line. As we've seen in the fires over the last few years, it doesn't matter where your house is. If you're anywhere near the fire, 5 feet means nothing to an ember storm. And required defensible space, that's required for initial construction, both for residential and commercial. And again, that would be required for the initial. The follow-up would be up to the homeowner. And then the third change here is adding a new chapter, storage of distilled spirits and wines. We have had questions about this. People wanted to bring in a micro distillery. There's one or two in Gilpin right now. I suspect we'll get more inquiries about this. It actually allows for kind of a mid-level storage rather than the really high standards that are required for large quantities. It creates a middle level so that it's more attainable for a business owner to get that approved. So next slide. So a little bit more on residential fire suppression systems. As you can see there, pretty recent stats from 2019. Over 300,000 fires in homes, almost 3,000 deaths, almost 13,000 injuries from fires. Big thing here, residential and firefighter death rates are 80% lower in homes with fire sprinklers. Just makes sense. Fire gets put out quicker, people can get out. People who can't get out as well on their own, the fire just gets put out quicker. Firefighter deaths, it may seem a little strange, but the fact that one, putting the fire out quicker, and two, the new homes are being built with a lot lighter materials that just don't hold up very well to fire. They can burn through very quickly. We've had floor collapses, wall collapses, things like that. And that causes a lot of the firefighter deaths. 96% of the time, fire sprinklers keep the fire to the room of origin, which is great. You're limiting your damage there. There is a really good article here that I've included the link if you want to look at that at a later time. So next slide. Again, this is just the same information. The video here we'd hope to show doesn't work for us online, but if you get a copy of these slides, you can take a look at the video there. So yeah, on to the next one. So exterior flammability, that's a big concern for us. Everywhere in town, this is a concern. Maybe a little less in downtown, along First, Second, and Third Street, the east part, but it's still there. So we've seen from these other fires around the country and in Colorado, it doesn't matter. When the embers blow into town, everything's burning. And getting this exterior flammability sealed up and getting that done makes a huge difference. So this is just some of the things we're looking for here. Like I said already, that if you're within 5 feet of a property line or your house, you're building a house within 5 feet, you've got to meet these requirements already. We're just asking that we do this throughout town, and we're pretty much pulling it directly from what Boulder County requires. That way for builders, doesn't matter where they're building, either in the county or in town, they've got the same requirements. So, yeah, and it's interesting that these standards, some of them have been on commercial buildings going back to the 1800s. And we're just kind of catching up with residential construction now. And the 1800s for commercial buildings was based on, big fires, the Great Chicago Fire, and fires in Boston and San Francisco, and all these other places that had these huge conflagrations in town where, hundreds or thousands of businesses and large buildings burned. So we're kind of just catching up with that now, and we do want to, we see that makes a huge difference in fires. So let's move on to the next one, how much this costs. So Headwaters Economic, which is up in Idaho or Montana, I'm forgetting which one right now, did a big survey of home construction costs, looking at wildfire resistance. And they actually found that it's somewhat cheaper to build a wildfire resistant home. The biggest reason was siding. If you compare something like a concrete board to a more traditional wood siding, it is less expensive. Some people don't like the looks of it. There are other options, but those are going to cost you more. And we know that if you're looking at, say, stucco or metal or something like that. But it is relatively comparable priced. I know when I built my house, it wasn't any more expensive to do the concrete siding, concrete board. And I'm sure the top out price isn't accurate for around here, but at least it gives you a little bit of reference. Okay, next slide. And here broke down some costs, and I had conversations with about half a dozen builders in town to try to get these numbers. So they are an approximate. Some builders have, a solid crew that can come in and do things quick, and the prices may be a little lower. Others doing it by themselves, or maybe run a little bit more because it's taking a little longer. But siding, basic wood siding that looks okay. It's about $4 a square foot. Something like a cheap wood, looks like lap siding. Kind of looks like the hardy board. It's about $3 a square foot. If you go to the hardy board, it's about the same, around $3 a square foot. Stucco is about $4. Stone is probably 16 plus. Then you've got other options like metal and things like, and brick and things like that are going to be up in those higher price ranges. We are including decks in this, and we're just seeing decks are a huge place where structure fires start during a wildland fire. So it's really important to have decks secured as well. Basic wood deck, not ignition resistance, somewhere between 25 and $30 a square foot. Again, that's depends on the builder. If you're looking at an ignition resistant composite, something like Trex is the brand name, a little bit more, in the 30 to $40 a square foot range. And if you're looking at an ignition resistant wood, if you really want that wood deck, something like Ipe, that's a lot more expensive. But as we've seen with other things, if you're willing to pay the price, if that's what you want, it is going to cost more. Last thing on cost here is on sprinkler systems. The National Fire Protection Association Standard 13D is what most of the residential fire sprinkler systems are around here. That $5 to $6 a square foot, that's for a pretty basic house. Flat ceilings, nothing exciting, well insulated. We are seeing some go up quite a bit more than that. And that's primarily due to our location. One, that there's nobody up here that's installing sprinkler systems, so everybody's coming up from below, and they're going to tack on a charge for that. Almost every system I see going in has antifreeze in it because you got to put sprinklers up in ceiling areas, and insulation just can't guarantee that you're not going to freeze that pipe. We also have more complex houses up here. Almost every house I've been into lately that's around the area that's getting sprinkler systems has large vaulted ceilings. That takes more time, more materials to put a sprinkler system in that. So those type of features do add to the price and run that up a little bit higher. And we certainly understand that. But certainly I'm currently inspecting a number of residences outside of town that are required to have sprinkler systems because Boulder County does require it. And they all have these big vaulted ceilings and other custom features that make the installation, excuse me, more complex. And I think that's my last one.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
Okay, thank you.
So, Cynthia Bakke, Deputy Zoning Administrator, has spent some time looking at affordable housing goals that the Board of Trustees and Planning Commission have worked on over the last 5 years. And she's going to do a brief overview of those initiatives.
Thanks, Miranda. So there has been discussion of affordable housing and the continued need for affordable housing in the town as market prices have increased, and also given the economic impacts of COVID. And it has been requested to understand what has been done regarding affordable housing. So I've lined out a few things. This was in the Board of Trust packet, although I don't that we have this included in the slide presentation. So I'm going to go over these things that the Planning Commission, there we go. Thanks, Mark. That the Planning Commission has discussed. So this is not in particular order, except for the top of it where it notes that we opened up in December 3rd, 2015. There was a public affordable housing. And that was to discuss the definition of affordable housing and consideration, barriers, and goals. So that kind of opened up. It wasn't super well attended, unfortunately, but it kind of kicked off the discussion of these goals. The goals were coming from the Board of Trustees, who had some overarching goals to include infrastructure and housing was their goal. And then the Planning Commission had work plan goals that they had been working on. So one of those was the administrative review of under 4 units, provided that the zoning requirements are met. And that intends that duplexes up to 4plexes could be approved administratively and not require a special review use, which came before the Planning Commission in December of 2016. And there was an ordinance that was fairly quickly there, February 17th. 2017, that was ordinance 746. So they actually did achieve that goal relatively quickly. Some of these other goals that follow, they did take some years of discussion and other considerations. The affordable housing projects built by Boulder County Housing Authority for 26 units there on the main road coming in by the library, that added to the overall units owned by Boulder County Housing Authority in the town, which I would estimate to be 50 units total, the 26 units with Tungsten Village. And then there's 6 units in the Prime Haven singular building. There are 12 units among 3 buildings in the Beaver Creek Apartments. And there are 6 separate homes on Rodeo Drive. So that was a mix of different types of buildings that Boulder County has built over the years. But they had come with a Tungsten Village that was initially introduced in 2017. In January, they had asked for an extension to get to the final PUD that included the right-of-way vacation requests that flanked both sides of them, and they worked with the Calvary Chapel on that to change the orientation of the Johnson Street side. And there were a number of ordinances that were associated with that. The ADU and short-term rental, those were introduced. The ADU was introduced in 2017, and there was ongoing discussion in that a few years. And there were ordinances that resulted the following year and in 2020. Short-term rental, that was introduced a little bit earlier. And the deals of, which was the long-term rental discussion. That long-term rental discussion, thanks, Miranda, that was introduced in 2016 as well, although that met with a lot of public opposition of folks not feeling like they wanted to have their long-term rental in the town at the time, and the subsequent years of kind of opening that initial discussion, January 2016, to where the ordinances were adopted to address short-term rental regulations. That was a few years of discussion, and certainly the use had proliferated in that time. So that resulted in a number of ordinances for short-term rental, to amend the business licensing code, and for occupational tax for lodging. So that was a 4-year discussion, roughly. The elimination of barriers to mixed-use developments, that came out of a joint Board of Trustees, Planning Commission, joint work session, and that was one of the goals in the comprehensive plan, that the board wanted the Planning Commission to seek out ways to eliminate barriers to allow mixed use in the commercial areas. And that was done. There is a caveat on the number of units and the size of the buildings that was added, but in other ways they did seek to eliminate barriers to mixed use to allow that. And that came out with Ordinance 784 in 2018. So that was a little under a year for that one. As I said earlier, the long-term rental discussion came up and was fairly quickly shot down. The town did not adopt long-term rental regulations, although there has been some subsequent discussion at the Board of Trustees in the intervening years. Financial incentives were another, creating financial incentives for developers of affordable housing. That was discussed in 2016 initially as one of the goals. The town hasn't adopted incentives. It discussed it, but it sort of pivoted through town staff changes and others toward the other goals that were worked further on. So financial incentives for affordable housing have not been adopted, and that could be a continued discussion, as could long-term rental. And then the last one, I think I didn't include in this slide, but I wanted to note that one of the other goals was a creation of overlay districts, and that was also introduced in January 27th of 2016. At the Planning Commission, they had briefly discussed overlay districts, and that would be something like a historic district or an affordable housing district that would have its own zoning associated with it as an overlay to the general area that it's in. They had not made any progress on the overlay districts, and so the status of that, along with the financial incentives for affordable housing and long-term rental, none of those had any regulations adopted, but there were other ordinances adopted for those other items. And certainly this is not to say that the Planning Commission or the Board of Trustees has solved the affordable housing crisis in Netherlands. So if there are considerations or reconsiderations of any of these elements, or the three that hadn't been adopted, that could come before the Planning Commission if that's a work goal for this year, and then next year, or the Board of Trustees, if that is considered. And I think that does it for my one slide, or a couple slides.
Thanks, Cynthia. So in addition to the initiatives related to housing, Karen Garrity, Town Administrator, has identified some housing assistance programs that Netherland residents may qualify for. She was going to give a brief overview of those.
Thank you, Miranda. I do want to just add a couple things to what Cynthia was talking about. So, for instance, when I started with the town in September of 2017, the focus at that point was still trying to decide how we were going to deal with short-term rentals and the accessory dwelling units. And of course, also, we were able to pass the mixed-use ordinance. And the board at that time and the Planning Commission was very concerned about the increase in housing cost, because investors were coming in, third-party investors, and buying up the houses, and they were just increasing in value so quickly. So that was really the focus that staff was given from both the Planning Commission. The BZA was also involved in these joint meetings as well. So staff did stay busy and still worked on the initiatives as directed by the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission. And the Board of Trustees still is very concerned about affordable housing, as Cynthia mentioned. And even when these code changes were brought to them, several of them asked, what is this going to do? How is this going to impact? the cost of housing. And of course, Rick has addressed some of that, and some of the slides have as well. In addition, the Board of Trustees asked that we, as staff, look at some of the different assistance programs that are out there. So the state does have a couple programs in place to assist developers, especially individual homeowners, but also multifamily projects that developers are working on. So one is through the Division of Housing, which is a division of the Department of Local Affairs, and they do have down payment assistance and other funding opportunities for first-time home buyers. They also provide low-interest revolving loans for homeowner repairs, modifications, and new construction. And then our Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, they're a financial institution, and they support both first-time home buyers and developers of multifamily projects. And they do that with low-interest loans. They also have a grant program for down payment assistance. So there is money out there that is available, especially for that first-time home buyers or homeowners who are doing remodels or modifications, as well as developers who are looking at multifamily projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. So today is obviously our second public charrette. This slide just goes over kind of our goal for March, which is to really focus on public vetting and getting community input on our recommended code changes. So that's happening throughout this month. And then the plan is to go back before the Board of Trustees in April to do a work session where we would share all the feedback you provide to us during the public charrettes. And then you kind of let it unfold from there, but the goal would be to potentially bring a draft ordinance before the board end of April with a public hearing in May. And then if ready, the ordinance would go into effect in June. I also wanted to do kind of a follow-up from the Board of Trustees meeting. So on March 2nd, our team, along with Safe Built, did a presentation to the Board of Trustees, the same one that you're viewing today. And some feedback came out of that of things they wanted us to look into further. And that's in regards to sustainable building materials, home orientation to capitalize on passive solar, and passive heating and cooling. So the links in this document go to provide more information, but our team is also doing further research into these three categories. Before I turn it over to questions too, I just want to draw attention to that we have a dedicated website page now for the building code. So you can click on it by accessing this link, or if you go to our homepage on the right-hand side, underneath the various icon boxes, there's one at the bottom for 2018 building code. And I would encourage you to check that website often, as that's where we'll be providing all of our updates. So in our last kind of a little over 20 minutes together, we'd love to hear, May and Billy, any questions or feedback you have or areas of interest. So I'll let either one of you jump in if you have any.
Well, I have a question for Rick. Rick, are you there?
I am here.
Hey, it's just a practical question. I have a wood deck, and I have heard about how dangerous they are, and I'm thinking about redoing it. What about the framing lumber? Does that also have to be fireproof?
I'm sorry, the which kind of lumber?
The framing for the deck? Or not the framing.
Yeah, it either needs to be treated somehow for fire resistance, or a large enough material, typically 4 inches and larger, that resist fire for quite a bit longer than the 2x material you typically see.
Okay, thank you. And then I did have a couple questions for, I guess, town staff. I'm on the housing subcommittee, and we've had a hard time figuring out what the grand vision, if you will, if we're developing that now. I rarely hear a discussion when it comes to housing about numbers. How are we doing in terms of meeting the requirements set out by the housing needs study or the recommendations? How many units did we add through the
Uh, May,
Yes.
this is Karen, so I can tell you a little bit about the progress that was made with the Board of Trustees. They did adopt a resolution that Boulder County recommended, which is that 12% of the housing in Nederland, you know, the goal is to eventually have 12% of the housing in Nederland be affordable, and that's based on the AMI. So, you know, basically folks' income, and I don't have that number in front of me, but where we're at with that is we have 50 units right now. We had the last time that Cynthia worked on the census for the 2020 census, we identified 777, something like that, living units in our community. So you can see we're not even at 10%, although we have almost doubled it with the building of Tungsten Village. So that is the sort of goal that it's actually both, I believe all of the municipalities, including those in the peak to peak region that are in Boulder County, adopted those resolutions for 12% for housing. And like I said, we're at about 50, and we would want to be closer to 100 and over to meet that 12% goal.
Okay, that's very clear. And then I just have a couple other questions. I don't know whether Billy wants to jump in here or whether I should just race through my.
Go for it,
Okay.
May. Just a good question.
Thanks. I did check a link to the overlay district model in Palm City, California.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I noticed, I checked the demographics of the town, and they have 40,000 jobs within their city. They have, their area is almost 27 square miles,
Right.
and they have 52,000 permanent residents. So this has been a little bit of yes.
Yeah, the only reason I sent that was it was the only one I could find that was even related to, you know, housing. And when I've sent out one since then to all of you for what's going on in Colorado with overlay districts, and they're really being used to mitigate hazards. They're not being used for affordable housing. And the only one I could find that had anything to do with density actually reduced the density in a residential area because of flood danger. So mostly, and I've sent that, you probably haven't had a chance to look at it, because I have been researching it to find out, you know, how are overlay districts used? How are they used in our state? And also I sent a link to actually affordable housing incentives that have been added to code. I really like Longmont's because they're very comprehensive, and they just, you know, they're dealt with the standard way that you would update your code, revise your code, bring something into law, which you actually would have to do with an overlay district as well. So I'm not seeing that overlay districts are used for affordable housing incentives or creating affordable housing districts. Maybe that was done in the past and I just can't find it. But what I see is happening, especially in our state, is overlay zoning is used to mitigate hazards. And then for affordable housing, there are incentives put into code. So for instance, a certain, let's say CBD, I'm just making this up, might be allowed to increase their density based on their agreement to have affordable housing. And then affordable housing would be clearly spelled out. You know, what does it mean to be affordable housing? How long do those units have to remain affordable, and so on and so forth. So I did send to you and your committee links to both the city of Boulder and the city of Longmont, so you could see how those incentive programs work and how they're called up in code.
Well, I did go to the Longmont one, and the link wasn't working when I clicked on the link, you know, information for builders or information for residents. It just, opened it for about a nanosecond and then closed it again. So I just believe that, I mean, you know, sometimes we say we're going to do something, and then it's like the greenhouse, it wasn't a greenhouse, the affordable housing that isn't affordable. For example, the house that just sprang up next door to me as a result of the ADU ordinance, um, it actually exceeds the yard and bulk requirements if you were to just use the 8,000 square foot lot that it's on, but they've combined it with another one. So it's a gigantic structure that is certainly not affordable. I know a lot of the STR people had to sell their homes, but I doubt if that's really affected our stock of affordable housing, which brings me to my final point, which is my own belief is that in many ways our world is reaching a tipping point. And, you know, we talk about 80% of the median income. This is way more than typical residents of Netherlands have ever been able to earn. And yeah, we have new people coming in that have good income and they're able to sustain all kinds of things. But the fact remains, we have people who have been in town for a long time that are being impacted by all these things. And my thought is that this idea about alternative building materials is potentially a game changer. And I would like to see that followed up. I didn't see anything in there about building into dirt. For example, I have a lot where I could build a home into the side of the hill potentially. I don't see that in there. I understand that teepees are illegal for people to go into. I'd like to see a discussion of that. And I'd also like to see the town address in a fundamental way the position on recreational vehicles, because this is a way that a lot of people supplement their income. They have someone park an RV, or family member gets an RV and lives outside. My guess is that your goal is to eliminate these. Is that correct?
Well,
I'm
I
not
think that
sure.
would be for the Board of Trustees
Yeah.
to weigh in on. It's not, I mean, that's not a part of the 2018 building code. And so I think that's a larger discussion in terms of kind of housing types and what the board is looking for. I mean, obviously our current zone does limit, it does impact some building structures and limit that, but it's not a part of 2018 building code, I guess is what I'm saying. We're not making any sort of recommendations on types of buildings.
Right. Well, I mean, it all adds up. So, and also just kind of in a related thing in terms of numbers and build out and plans, I did ask, I don't know whether Chris Peltier is still on. Chris, are you there? He's probably busy with something else, but
Yeah, I'm here.
oh, great. Yeah, I asked Karen, I don't know whether she was able to forward it to you. Just for a real simple, you know, 1 or 2 page summary of where we're at with water and sewer utility, how many we can accommodate at this point, like without upgrades, what the upgrade schedule is at this point. Just something that's fairly simple, an
Um,
overview, like a memo.
I can. It's a bigger. It's a little more complicated than that, but I could put something together for you, May. The town has just recently nearly completed the master infrastructure plan, which goes into great detail about capacities of our treatment facilities.
Yeah,
And,
I
you know,
started on it, Chris, and I need somebody like you to make it readable and all this stuff about how to leverage the debt and everything. That is interesting. But yeah, I mean, so that we can review it in the housing committee and maybe try to establish some baselines for, what growth we need to satisfy our housing needs, over a period of time, a defined time scale. But, contiguous with that, of course, has to be public works and roads. Um, so I'd appreciate it if you could do that. I also asked for one on the transportation. That's unrelated to this discussion, though. Thanks, Chris. I'd appreciate it.
okay, yeah, I'll try to put something together for you, May, and the rest of the group.
Yeah, my eyes swim when I get to about page, 70. It's just like, I can't put all this together into a 1 page memo or 2 pages. I
Hey,
think that's
May.
it. I guess my only other question back to the alternative building materials and so forth. Karen and Miranda, how would you suggest that I move forward in my interaction with the board to encourage them to consider some of these other building things?
I would recommend that someone actually asked about this last night on how to get their recommendations through. I would recommend writing a letter or outlining it and sending it to me in an email, because when we go before the board for the work session on the 6th, that's the type of thing we'll want to review with them, is the recommendations from the community.
Excellent. Thank you.
May, this is
Yes.
Cynthia. I just wanted to add a couple comments to some of the things that you said.
Mm.
You talked about recreational vehicles. That's a zoning chapter thing. Building is, the codes are referenced in chapter 18. So if there was a desire to have them consider that, that's something that would be in the zoning realm. So consideration for the Planning Commission Board of Trustees, if there was desire to focus on that, of this is a way that could bring in additional funds, whether it's parked there or with respect to the current mobile home section, which notes that it has to be in a mobile home park. And then you mentioned something about the 80% AMI. So they could decide if there is a consideration of this is what affordable housing means, and there could be a focus more on that 30 to 60%, because 0 to 30 they're going to have federal programs. 80 and above, I don't think they really need that much help. But in that more middle range of 30 to 60, maybe that is where they should hone in housing, so we can address service workers and other folks who, as you say, they've been living in the community for a long time, but they're getting missed.
Appreciate that, Cynthia.
Sure enough.
Is there any other questions or feedback? Billy, do you have anything?
Yeah, sure. A couple quick things. Mostly, thanks for the presentation and just mostly that you just took the time to break out what actually changes versus laying out the whole ICC. That was helpful. So yeah, a couple things I did notice on the above grade walls. I think what they're saying where what they are saying is you either have to build a real thick wall with a lot of, or you got to have some continuous insulation as well as your cavity insulation. It's not really shear wall, but it's usually like rigid foam. The example you showed was kind of more of a draped basement, but rigid foam on the outside is generally how people get it. So it's the actual cost of that are not as crazy of a bump up as builders feared they would be when they for in areas of the country. This is the work I do in areas of the country where they've already moved to this. The bump up in price hasn't been off the charts like they thought it would. It hasn't been that bad as they thought it would. Couple quick. One thing is like on these affordable housing incentives that Cynthia was talking about, and they are kind of shelved for now. But where would that money come from? I love it. I love the idea. I just was curious where that money. They imagine where that
You
money
know,
would come from.
Billy, usually there is not a source of funding. So
Yeah.
most municipalities, what they'll do is either something like increase the density that the developer is allowed to meet, in, even though it's beyond what's in that zone normally, so that they could build the extra units that would be affordable, and that doesn't really involve money per se. They would still be obligated to pay all the same fees and everything, so they wouldn't get a break. Other municipalities have done things like reduce the fees or actually reduce taxes that are collected, but there doesn't tend to be a place that the money comes in directly to offset that deficit. The idea is if you build more units, you have more people in town who could potentially be spending money in town, but it's not like there's any kind of direct flow of money to offset that deficit.
That makes that makes a lot of sense. Okay. And then to May, one of May's questions, alternative building materials, alternative buildings. I think yeah, I've been curious about that too, whether like what I mean, I haven't even really looked into it yet, but like things like straw bale, and you know, this might be a thing with Rick to weigh in on too, like straw bale is an option for a building, you know, what's the fire issues you got to deal with that. And then you know, one thing they are seeing is like things like SIPs, structurally insulated panels, and insulated concrete forms right now are other ways of building versus stick building that are actually comparing really well with the price of wood going up this year, that price of lumber going up, that they're comparing really well in price to build a home, to kind of switch to these types of wall construction. And they have well, pros and cons, but there's other ways to build alternatively in that way. But I am kind of curious about things like straw bale or earthship. You talked about building into the side of the hot wall. Earthship, that's usually for something that's south facing, May, just so you know. Yeah, I'm just curious what kind of codes are available. I mean, the 2018 doesn't necessarily rule those options out, but I am wondering where the town stands on those kind of building practices.
Hey, Billy, I don't want to step on Rick's toes on the fire department aspects, but I would say with respect to the building code, you know, there are some challenges with quote alternative building because the code is written in a certain way, and basically alternative building styles have to meet the spirit of that code, and sometimes that can be a challenge based on the way that it's written. And so in some cases they may have to do testing or the industry itself, say like monolithic domes are extremely tight. So tight you'd have to use a dehumidifier to out of it. You know, that's something I've always been interested in, alternative buildings, and I've lived in some, although there can be challenges to meeting the code as it's written. So the industry itself may have to do testing to prove, hey, this will meet insulation or other aspects. So that's probably more a question for Safe Built. And then I do want to note with respect to building fees, in terms of something Karen mentioned about potential write-off for building fees. So the town contracts plan review and inspection services with Safe Built. Safe Built gets 80% of all permit fees that are not hard town fees. So unless there's a escrow fee or the utility, for example, the PIFs and TAPs, they can't touch that money. But everything else, they're going to get 80%. Permit fees, plan review fees, electrical fees, those associated building fees, and the town gets 20. So there is not much that the town has the ability to potentially write off for that. But I just want to throw that out there. And then another thing that Karen had brought up with density bonuses. So there is a density bonus in the neighborhood commercial, the NC district. That was something that the Bullyoungs had come through with their Little Bear Village, and they wanted to maximize the density there to have 4 units versus 2. That has been allowed, and it's been used a few times in the town, not greatly. There was discussion back, I'm gonna say 2016, 2017, about considering the ability to do that in another district, the high density residential district. It has the same base. The base size is generally 4,000 square feet. So it has the same base size of lots in the high density as the neighborhood commercial does. The majority of the high density residential, as you probably are aware, Billy, is in Old Town. And there's a strip off of Conger and a strip on the south side of East First Street running down. There's some CBD properties down there. High density residential properties starting from Ron's parking lot and heading down to the east. When that was proposed to have that density increase, and that density increase is a case-by-case basis, they have to run it as a planned unit development. The property has to be at least 8,000 square feet. So there's associated conditions that they would have to meet in order to have that density bonus. And when that was proposed, a good majority of Old Town came out and came to the meeting and roundly opposed it when it was at the Board of Trustees. The Planning Commission had weighed in pretty quickly on the idea because it hadn't been utilized much in the town, so they didn't think it was very controversial. But when that came forward, so they forwarded it to the to the Board of Trustees, and when it came to the Board of Trustees, it was a very large meeting, and a lot of folks from Old Town came out and said, hey, you know, you guys always try to make density and push it on us, and we would rather not have more density over here in Old Town. And can the infrastructure withstand it and everything else? So it was proposed to try it in another district and kind of roundly opposed. And then there is sort of density, not necessarily density increase, but that allowance for mixed use does, specifically with the central business district, it doesn't stipulate how many units you can have. It's based on the proposal. So that's why there were conditions put on the building sizes and the number of units potentially, because the central business district, which is the majority of property for the downtown, Ron Mitchell owns a good deal of that, that doesn't stipulate what the minimum lot size per dwelling unit is in that specific district. So there's allowance for mixed use, but it kind of comes down to the proposal. It leaves it open. It's not as regulated as other districts, but sort of kind of gets to some of that density bonus. I don't know if any of that helps, but
it does.
throw that in.
No, that's super helpful. I appreciate it. Yeah, and good point about if you some of these alternative buildings, you might have to make your case with Safe Built that it meets the present code that it meets the present code. So yeah, that's a good point. Too bad that they're getting 80% of the money. Thanks for the resources on the Division of Housing, Department of Local Affairs, and the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. It's good to know that that's out there for, I'd say more affordable options for first-time home buyers. And it'd be good to kind of list if there's any federal, like FDA or USDA. I've heard, not FDA, but USDA, that there's other, they may be more rural. I don't know that would or wouldn't apply
I
here.
think
But
the Division of Housing does receive those federal funds.
okay,
Yeah,
that's how
yeah.
that's how
And
that
then
happened.
and that's how they disperse them through those programs.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, well, it's good to see those resources available, and that would be something that would hopefully increase affordability. So in general, though, thanks for the great presentation. Interesting
Hey,
info. 2018 doesn't seem quite as limiting to move to as I thought, as I wondered.
hey, Billy, this is Rick.
Yeah, oh yeah, Rick, I want to hear from you. Yeah.
Yeah, hey, a quick comment for you on straw bale. As far as fire, exterior resistance to wildland fire is really good because most of it's less stucco-like material on the outside,
Yeah.
and that does a really good job. They've been around for a long, long time, but there's not a lot of them, so we don't have a lot of fire history as far as fires that originate inside. But again, if it's the same kind of material on the inside, it's going to be really protective as well. If it is something you know more about, I would really encourage you to take a look at that appendix in the residential code on straw bale, because I don't know much about them, and so I read through that and it sure looks good to me. But I really would rely on somebody who's got that expertise in that to look at that appendix and see if it makes sense for us to be adopting, or if it's way off base somehow.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I will check out that appendix. I have a friend who designs and builds homes, straw bale out of Moab, and he's been doing it for like almost 20 some years. And he said his what they've learned is that it's there's a fire danger at a couple points of construction, like when it's just raw straw.
That makes sense.
But really, once it's sealed, once it's cladded, sealed with stucco, et cetera, that comes way down,
Yeah,
and
that
then
makes
you have
perfect
that
sense to
thick
me.
wall that takes a long time to burn through. So
Yep.
cool. And I've lived in a straw bale home before, and they're remarkable.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well,
Rick.
thank you both. If you don't have any other questions, our team was going to stick on, and you're welcome to jump off unless there's anything else you want to discuss.
And I wanted to add something really quick. I sent a message to SafeBell to see what they think about earth berming. In terms of, I understand that the alternative methods and styles have to meet the spirit of the building code, but I focus kind of on insulation. Did you want to add anything to that question to them?
Insulation of a home that's made in the dirt.
Yeah, I mean, I presume that's kind of what you were getting at with the earth berming, is that it adds a lot of warmth to a home, building it into the hillside and backfilling the backside of it, depending on the method, building style you're using, obviously. But I was presuming that was kind of along the line of looking at home insulation and other things, or just the allowance for it. Is that correct?
Well, that's a good point. I think they do. I think the thing that comes out to me is when you're thinking about building something like that, of course, you've got different engineering standards for your framing, because you're going to have a lot more weight if you do have earth, any part of it underneath. And so I didn't know if they have a engineering book that they refer to, or if that's not in their purview, or so it's more the engineering of it that I would think they might not want to touch because they're not familiar with it.
Gotcha. I'll follow up with them about that and get back in touch.
That'd be great,
Good, yeah.
Cynthia. I'm going to send you a really cool link of these homes that are being built. That it's called Foamcrete, I think.
It's called, say that again?
I believe it's Foamcrete.
Is it aircrete?
Aircrete, perhaps? Yeah.
Aircrete, I know, is one of the materials being used.
There's
Right.
pumicecrete, aircrete, hempcrete.
Concrete.
I've done a hempcrete workshop.
Right. That's really good stuff. I still have a brick that somebody made me way back in the early 90s. But yeah, Karen, I know you saw that picture. And I can find it and send it to Cynthia, but it includes a whole video on on how they're built, and they are usually in a dome shape. I'd also be curious, Cynthia. I'll send you a message, um, like about the teepees, why they don't allow people in them, stuff like that. Because I always assumed,
I know. Go
you
ahead.
know, we'd put up a teepee and a powwow for, a storytelling teepee, but if you can't put people in a teepee, then that was news to me. I heard about that, so curious about that as well.
I know that people have asked about teepees and yurts over time. Challenges with teepees are trying to keep them heated warm enough because you lose a lot of that heat above you with the cone above you, and so people use an oban to close off the top part of it to keep the heat down. And then I believe, and I'm not sure still, but I know the county had not allowed yurts. In some ways, I had looked at them in the past. I thought they were maybe just too sturdy for our weather. When I got more feedback on this question with Dan Wester, the building official, he said that there's a lot of challenges with yurts, I presume with teepees as well, where they can't meet structural requirements in a number of other aspects of the building code. And that is the challenge, is not being able to meet so many aspects in each chapter of the building code. That he went into a bit more detail, but he basically said they can't do it.
And I get that, but that doesn't mean you might not be able to use it seasonally, and that they're unsafe at any speed, if you will. If it's 60 degrees out and there's no wind, like it's the June season, I would say seasonal use of these. I don't know about yurts. I've seen problems with yurts in terms of a lot of leakage and stuff like that. I'm sure they're fixing that, but I don't see why it would be against the law to walk into a teepee. I mean, that seems crazy. I can see why they would say these are not residences, but if you want to camp out in your teepee or something, I don't see why that would be a problem that people can assume.
Well, I wonder if, because the building height for, say, accessory structures is based on the zoning district that you're in. So it varies from 25 to 20 feet in places depending on the district. Now, can a teepee be made under the allowable size, under the building height size, and used as a storage structure that is not dwelling per se? Maybe that would be possible if it was used as an accessory structure, but not necessarily an accessory dwelling unit that has more requirements and is going to trigger like utility requirements and other things, let alone building code concerns. But as for whether or not a teepee could be used for storage, be under the building height of the district and under the size of a permit, that's
That doesn't
possible.
make any that doesn't make any sense to me, and that's not what I am advocating, to use teepees as storage sheds. I'm saying teepees are places where people go to get out of the sun, or they're like a camping thing, like a tent. We don't have requirements on how good your tent has to be if you're going to
You're
sleep
right.
out at night. So I think we should have some kind of recognition that a teepee can be a camping thing, and should be no more regulated for that sort of use than your tent that you got from REI.
I hear
And
what you're
I would
saying.
recommend adding that into your, I believe like the letter or whatever it is you choose to write to the Board of Trustees, that in addition maybe to building materials, different types of structures that you want to see incorporated into town code.
Okay. I'll work on
The
that.
only thing that I would add to that, May, is that we would have to enforce that. So if somebody says, hey, I'm only going to have this out during this season, then the town would be in the business of enforcing that and saying, all right, pull your teepee down. You've hit your seasonal limit. But if that, you know, if you sort of craft your comments in essence of, would you consider this seasonally? In the town, it's a complaint driven town. And so if somebody complains, hey, this person's teepee is still up, they need to take it down. That's where we're going to hear it from. So
Exactly. And we all
consider on
know
that.
yeah.
What?
Turn your lights off.
I mean, you know, it's usually where we're going to hear it if we don't see it ourselves to notice it is we're going to hear it from the neighbor who's going to let us know. And then if the issue is not resolved through them speaking to their neighbor about it to resolve the issue, they're going to call the town and let us know. So we'll generally hear most things. Maybe not as soon as people want, but we'll generally hear it if there's somebody not complying. But I do think it's a good thought. We don't mandate the size of tents and the structure of tents and things unless somebody's doing it commercially. So it's really on the liabilities on the private property owner.
Gosh, great discussion. I want to join Billy and thank you all for your time. And Miranda and Karen, you guys there should be an award, a marathon award for town work. And you guys should share first prize.
Well, thank you. Those Envision 2030 conversations are amazing. They're enlightening. They're very rich. It's an honor to be a part of those.
Well, and you contributed so much, both of you do. So I want to thank you for that.
Thanks for saying that, May.
And thank you both for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys. It is an honor to be on those Envision meetings. I'm enjoying it. So thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Enjoy the day.
You too.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cynthia, will you stop recording?
Sure.